So we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, my name is Brian Sanderoff. I'm a regularly trained pharmacist. I used to own two pharmacies in downtown Baltimore. And at some point in my career of standing behind that counter doing that count, pour, lick, stick, type and gripe thing that pharmacists do, I really started to question how well I was helping my patients. And so I took one category of patients. For me, that was my blood pressure patients. And I looked at what I had been doing with them and for them for the 10 years that I was in my pharmacy at that point. And I asked myself a simple question: is what I'm giving my patients really helping them? And in the case of blood pressure, the question was, is it making the blood pressure go away? In other words, can they stop taking their medicine? And I was very shocked when I came up with the answer of no. And in fact, if you do have a high blood pressure problem and you're being treated with Western medicine, typically it starts with one medicine and then you need a higher dose and you need a second and a third medicine. Now, in pharmacy school, we're taught that that's a conditioning, a condition that's getting worse. And really, that's not the case at all. High blood pressure is not really a disease. It's just a very intricate way that a particular person's body is speaking to them, telling them something is out of balance. With the medicines that we give for high blood pressure, we're not listening to what the body's saying, and we're not fixing the underlying problem. All we're doing is sort of artificially lowering the blood pressure. And the body, in its wisdom, will say, now, you're not listening to me, and it'll make the blood pressure go up again. And that's why you have to have higher dosages and more medicines as time goes on. And so that realization, one, was shocking to me in my education, but also was the thing that opened a door to make me ask a question, and that is, how can I help my patients better? And that's really where I've come to practice the non-traditional holistic pharmacy that I do now, some 25 or 30 years later. So the thrust of the work that I do is helping to educate people understand the true ramifications of their decisions. That way they can then make different decisions if they want, and they will have a different result as far as their health goes. I've been known to say that the number one killer in this country is not heart disease. It is not cancer. It is not diabetes. The number one killer in this country is misinformation. It's a lack of understanding about how the body works and how the body will respond to the different stimuli we give it from the outside world. And so that's a big thrust of the work that I do, helping to educate people so that they can make different decisions based on proper information. The topic that we're speaking about tonight, leaky gut, to me it's key. I'm not one to over exaggerate things. And so when I say this is the most devastating condition that you've never heard of, and you probably have heard of it, or maybe you've heard something about it, it is devastating. And it is really important to understand and respect how, when the gut is not working properly, it affects everything and is probably the underpinning of every single one of the diseases of aging that you and I are trying to avoid as we get older. So let's go ahead and get into it. I wanted to start off with a few what I call gut facts. And so here they are. Number one, 70% of your immunity happens in your gut. Your gut is the major way that you interact with your environment. And when interactions could expose us to things that would be unhealthy for us, a lot of the protection against those negatives happens within the gut. There's actually more neurotransmitter activity in the gut than there is in the brain. This is not something that I learned about in pharmacy school, but it is a fact. Our gut is actually our first brain. It's not even our second brain. It's actually our first brain. And when you've heard someone say, or you've put forth the notion that you had a gut feeling about something, there is legitimate scientific evidence supporting the fact that that's not just a feeling, that's actually your first brain working. And how many times have you said, oh, I had a gut feeling about something, but my brain overrided it, and then the result wasn't what you had hoped for because you had that gut feeling and you just ignored those feelings. The gut is part of the outside world, and I really like to explain this and have people understand it. Your gut is really a tube that starts at your mouth and it goes through your body and out the other end. Anything that's inside that tube is not really part of you. That's still part of the outside world. It's just a part of the outside world that you happen to carry with you. And in that tube, there is an entire universe of activity. It is not until something crosses that barrier that gets through the gut into your body, then it actually becomes part of you. Until that time, you're just carrying around an outside part of the world with you. And the last thing I like to point out is that the actual surface area of the gut is about the size of a tennis court. And what this says is, even though your intestines, starting from your mouth all the way through, usually it's around 27 feet worth of tubing. But the truth is that it is constructed in a way that has a tremendous amount of surface area, which means that it's a tremendous mechanism to be able to absorb and interact with the outside world. And again, you are walking around with you this tube that carries around with it the surface area of about a tennis court. So what are the functions of the gut? There's a few functions that I'm just going to highlight here. Some of them may seem obvious, some of them maybe not. Number one is digestion. And, so one of the main purposes of the gut is actually breaking food down into its smallest parts so that they can be absorbed so that the body can regenerate and repair. Proteins ideally get broken down into individual amino acids, fats into fatty acids, carbohydrates into simple sugars. These are called macronutrients. Also, we get from our food through digestion micronutrients. Those are things like vitamins and minerals or phytonutrients that are, quote unquote, extracted from the food by the digestive process. Of course, the gut also is responsible for elimination. And this is the removing of the parts of the food that are not needed by the body, like certain kinds of fibers. This is also where bacteria, yeast, toxins, additives, those sorts of things get removed from the body. And that can be either just working through that tube, or that can be something that's added back to the tube as a result of the detoxification processes that the organs, including the liver, go through. The third function, and this is the one that really gets missed, or maybe just doesn't get thought about in this way, is discrimination. This is the really important function. It literally is deciding what should and what shouldn't become part of us. So you eat something, it goes through your body breaks it down into small parts. The gut is what determines, that's an amino acid, come on in, we can use you. You're a sugar, we'll use you for energy. You're a flavoring, I don't know what you are. You're a protein that doesn't look natural to me, we're just going to pass you along. Very important function of the gut, discrimination, deciding what to keep and what to get rid of. So what is leaky gut? So number one, I want to point out that leaky gut is not recognized by Western medicine. If after this webinar, you do some research and you learn about this and you go to your doctor and you say, hey, I wonder if I have leaky gut, the doctor is likely going to raise an eyebrow and say, what, do you got a leaky brain? There's no such thing as a leaky gut. And that is really, really unfortunate, because leaky gut and understanding of leaky gut, number one, it's basic biochemistry. And as I'm going to point out and make the case for, it may be the most important thing for your health for you to pay attention to. Now, what is leaky gut? If we wanted to describe it in more specific scientific terms, we would say that it's an alteration of appropriate gut permeability. Now, if you said to your doctor, hey, is it possible that I have an alteration of appropriate gut permeability? At least you would be speaking in terms that the doctor would get and understand. He or she may not give that any credence, but the doctor certainly would understand what it is that you're asking that way. But here's another way to explain it, and that's to say simply that the tight junctions are not tight anymore. So here's a little representation of the gut and how gut cells work. And so this is the lining of the gut where you have these, ups and downs, these valleys and peaks of cells. This is a microscopic look at one little area of those cells. And these are cells that are the gut cells. This is the stomach or the intestines. This is that inside part of the tube that really is part of the outside world. Remember that. And then over here, this is a blood vessel that comes very close to the lining of the stomach. And what's supposed to happen is as you digest foods and you break them down into their smallest parts, and so let's say we're talking about a protein. This would be a protein, and let's say it gets broken down into individual amino acids. That amino acid will enter into this cell, if it's appropriate to do so, and then it'll migrate through this cell and then be dumped to the other side where it goes right into the bloodstream. This is the way digestion is supposed to work. Now, remember, I said that with leaky gut, what's happening is that the quote unquote tight junctions aren't tight anymore. Well, the cells are supposed to be connected to each other in this very tight fashion, like a piece of cloth. Now, if we were to pull on that cloth and we were to separate out the strands of that cloth, we would see spaces in between those strands. That's what this is. This is an area where it's leaving the opportunity for something that was not completely digested and would never make it through the cell to actually get into the bloodstream. This is leaky gut. When this happens, let's say this is a partially digested protein. Oops, I got to go back there a second. Let's say that this is a partially digested milk protein called casein. When I say partially digested, a protein is a long chain of amino acids. And the work of digestion is to break those proteins down into individual amino acids. Well, for many people, for a variety of reasons, some of which we'll cover tonight, the body does not have the ability to break those proteins down into their individual amino acids. And so it may break them down into smaller chains of amino acids that we call polypeptides. That's what this guy would be right here. It's not the individual amino acids. Now, if this tried to migrate through this cell, it would never be allowed to. That's the gut having discrimination and doing its job. But when we get leaky gut and you get these junctions that aren't tight, this partially digested protein can migrate through that space and get into the bloodstream. That partially digested protein in your body is a trigger that says something is not right. The body basically says, I don't know what you are, but you don't belong here. It keys up the immune system, it triggers inflammation, and it is the underpinning for every one of the chronic diseases that we can get and are trying to avoid as we get older. Interestingly enough, I picked casein and a partially digested casein molecule or protein as the example because studies have shown that people that suffer from panic attack have a protein in their brains that looks very much like the partially digested casein protein that I just described to you. So this is an example of how leaky gut may actually be related to a specific condition like panic attack. And we're going to mention a whole bunch of those things. I also want to mention that this blood vessel being close to the lining of the gut to accept what is absorbed through the gut is by design because this blood goes immediately to the liver. This is the body's defense mechanism against things getting absorbed that shouldn't. When something comes into our gut and then gets into our bloodstream, the first place it goes is to the liver so that the liver can kind of police things and say, hey, all right, that doesn't belong here. I'm going to wage chemical warfare on it and break it down. I'm going to, combine it with other things so that it can be eliminated from the body. That's called the first pass effect, by the way. All right, so what are the ramifications of having leaky gut? Well, there are the obvious gut issues, things like chronic constipation or diarrhea, irritable bowel syndrome, colitis, Crohn's, reflux, food allergies and intolerances, especially when you've got an allergy or intolerance to a food that you didn't used to have a problem with. That is a key indicator that leaky gut is at play. There are skin issues. We're talking about any sort of rash, eczema, psoriasis, acne, rosacea, hives. And the reason is because, and I'm going to talk about this again in a little bit more detail, but when you have leaky gut, you've got a bunch of things getting into your system that don't belong there. And the first thing that's supposed to take care of it is the liver. But quickly the liver can get overwhelmed and can't keep up. The body will resort to using the skin as an organ of elimination if liver isn't doing its job well. And that's where all of these skin conditions come in. Now, you go to the doctor and you've got one of these obvious gut issues like you've got chronic diarrhea or constipation. Or you go to the dermatologist because you've got this rash or eczema or rosacea that won't go away. None of those doctors think, wow, what's going on with your gut? Now, if you go to a proper holistic practitioner, that's usually the first thing they think of. What's going on in your gut? I'll give you the example. I've got a patient who I've been dealing with on the other side of the country, and she sent me pictures of her rash that she's had for years. And, you know, she's been to dermatologists and she's done all sorts of detoxing and this and that. And what we've been concentrating on in a period of 2 months is really her gut function and her liver function, and how her body responds to stress, which is related, that I'll talk about. And 2 months down the road, her skin is, you know, barely has a rash anymore. Going from a state of a constant rash that you couldn't get rid of, been on all of the meds, to now not having a rash at all after just 2 months of attention to the gut. All right, what are the ramifications from leaky gut? How about immune function? We're talking about allergies, both seasonal and environmental. You're talking about multiple chemical sensitivities. Lots of times people, as they go on in life, find that they're more and more sensitive to smells, and that there are people that I've dealt with who can't be in an elevator or any sort of closed space with somebody that's wearing perfume because they get nauseous, they get sick from it. And that's, you know, a result of, again, the body getting overwhelmed by simple toxins that it normally would be able to take care of. Any autoimmune disease is most likely, one way or another, related to leaky gut. Now, understand that there's a genetic component to this as well, meaning that there are people who have a genetic tendency towards whatever disease, including many autoimmune diseases. But it is the leaky gut and the environment and how the body's responding to the environment that actually makes those genes express themselves in a worse way, where you end up with that sort of problem. So any sort of autoimmune issue, whether you're talking about rheumatoid arthritis or scleroderma or MS or lupus, the first place that we should think of working on is the gut and shoring up that leaky gut problem. All sorts of glandular issues, and so energy and fatigue issues like chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, temperature regulation issues, all related to gut function. Hormonal things, so PMS and libido issues, both for men and women. Menopausal symptoms, all related to gut function. There's a whole bunch of central nervous system correlations like brain fog, anxiety, depression, chronic headaches, migraines, all oftentimes related to really gut function, and weight issues, whether we're talking about having too much weight or not enough weight. Both of those things really related to leaky gut. So hopefully I'm doing okay with the presentation so far. Again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to type them right into the question box because they'll show up right there for me. So what causes leaky gut? Well, as I said, it's a combination of genetics, the genetic tendency, and a host of outside factors. And so those outside factors are diet. There are many foods that play a role with gut cells reproducing or not reproducing properly or interfering with the function of gut cells. In other words, if we went back to that other picture, in other words, causing those tight junctions to not be there anymore. Many of those foods are related to what we find, the proteins that we find in grains. So I'm not talking about just gluten, although gluten is a huge, huge culprit here. But I'm also talking about even non-gluten containing grains. And so the first thing I do diet-wise, if I have somebody that I suspect has leaky gut, is to get them off of grains completely. So that's the gluten-containing grains like wheat and oat and rye and spelt and barley, and then also other grains that we may think are safe and healthy for us, like brown rice, quinoa, corn is actually a grain. All those things should be avoided completely. The other more common culprits are dairy, corn, and soy. And so oftentimes we'll put people on an elimination diet where we eliminate a whole category of foods. The woman that I told you about with the rash, she is off of grains completely, has been for 2 months now. That's part of her recovery, her repair. There's digestion, because digestion oftentimes doesn't work well or work properly with folks. This is the way nature, and I should tell you that I've done a webinar about being on a grain-free diet. I've done a webinar about digestion, about the good bacteria and all the other things that you're going to hear me talk about in a little bit less detail today. So if you want to explore further each one of these things, go to the website, go to the webinar archives, and you'll see copies of presentations just like you're listening to now that you can listen to at your leisure. I'll also point out that the one that we're doing tonight right now is being recorded and will be on the website by the beginning of next week in the archives. So this is the way digestion is supposed to work. You eat a piece of food. That food contains enzymes to break itself down. And so the food drops to the upper part of the stomach, and the enzymes that are in the food start to break that down. Then it drops to the lower part, and the body says, all right, we've got more work to do. It elicits the help of the pancreas and the liver, and we create hydrochloric acid and other digestive enzymes, and we break the food down. What nature intended was 50%, 50%. 50, half of the work done by the enzymes that are in the food, half of the done work by the body. Well, what happens with the standard American diet is that the foods that we eat don't have the enzymes in them anymore. So we eat something, it drops to the upper part of the stomach, not a whole lot gets done, drops to the lower part, and the body says, whoa, look at all that work we have to do. Stresses the liver. I've already told you the liver's got some important other functions. This is going to make the liver distracted from doing some of its other work. Stresses the pancreas. We don't digest foods completely. Then when we combine that with leaky gut, what happens? Those partially digested foods get absorbed into the system and wreaks havoc in the body. You know how you know that enzymes are in foods? Because if you leave a food out, it'll start to break down. Well, part of that process is the enzyme starting to break it down. That's why aged beef is more tender than non-aged beef. And so when you go to the restaurant and it says that, that steak that you're about to eat was aged in a meat locker for 3 months, the reason it is because the proteases that are in that steak, that meat, raw, they start to break the protein bonds down, and that makes that meat more tender. But when we cook things over 118 degrees, when we process things and microwave things and drink carbonated beverages, that destroys the enzymes that are in the food. And again, there's a whole webinar about this if you want more detail about it. An imbalance of the good bacteria plays a very important role with leaky gut. And again, a whole webinar about this one particular topic. But we talked about that tube going through your body actually being a part of the outside world and there being a whole universe that lives in that tube. Well, part of that universe is a world of bacteria, a whole bunch of different kinds of bacteria. Those bacteria, you actually should have, a healthy adult should have more cells of the good bacteria in your gut than you have of every other cell in your body combined. Talking about trillions upon trillions upon trillions of cells. And there are a lot of factors that beat up the good bacteria in your gut. Usually when I'm doing a talk in the public and I'm talking about this topic, I'll ask for a show of hands. I'll say, who in here has had an antibiotic over the past 2 weeks? Now to the 30 or 40 people that are sitting there, maybe 3 or 4 people will raise their hand. And then I say, who in here has consumed tap water, chicken, or beef over the past 2 weeks? And of course, everybody raises their hand. And the point is that every one of those people has had exposure to antibiotics that can beat up the good bacteria that's in your gut. Stress, alcohol, caffeine, a whole bunch of other factors can beat up the good bacteria. And when those good bacteria aren't there the way they're supposed to be, that allows for things to grow and survive and proliferate and thrive in your gut that shouldn't, like yeast and viruses and negative bacteria. And all of those play a role with leaky gut. Oftentimes, people that have leaky gut have candida issues. That's a very specific yeast problem. Inflammation plays a very important role because when that whole process starts and we have offending substances introduced into our gut, it causes inflammation. And when things are inflamed, those cells can't work the way they're supposed to. So I know that it's common for people to be told by their physician that they should have a baby aspirin every day because of its potential blood thinning effects that can be positive on heart health. But it's caustic and it causes gut bleeding and it causes inflammation and irritation and ultimately leads to things getting absorbed that should never get absorbed. The same thing with nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories. And so when you see those commercials for Motrin or Advil or Nuprin or Naproxen or whatever, those things beat up your gut pretty good. and can lead to these sorts of problems. The other one, and this is the one that I see many practitioners, even holistic practitioners, not give enough credence to when it comes to the work of understanding leaky gut and reversing leaky gut. It's stress. And so I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest condensed version about this because I think, one, it's interesting. Then again, I'm a nerd about this, so I find a lot of this interesting. But number two, it's important to understand. So when you have stress and you go into a stress response, that is a life-saving mechanism in the body. Back when we were cavemen, a saber-toothed tiger jumped in the cave, and our adrenal glands would kick out the hormone of stress, which is called cortisol. And that would cause some very specific physiological changes. And those changes would happen by design to allow us to survive that encounter, that life-threatening encounter. So here are some of those physiological changes. Blood pressure would go up, and blood sugar would go up, and heart rate would go up. Now, the blood pressure and the heart rate are going up because we want to be able to very quickly shunt blood to the muscles in the brain so that we can fight or run. That's the fight or flight response. And that gives us the wherewithal to be able to do that. Blood sugar goes up, and that's because we're going to need fuel for that fighting or that running. Our immune system is buoyed, and that's because we're going to have likely going to have to do some repair and some, fighting against something that gets introduced from the outside world if we have to fight, right? Well, I told you that blood gets shunted to the muscles and the brain and the eyes. Do you know where blood gets shunted from? It gets shunted away from your gut. And that's because when a saber-toothed tiger jumps in the cave, job number one is not digestion. Your body's not worrying about digestion at that point. Your body's worrying about survival. Here's the problem, is that today we have this thing that's called chronic stress. In essence, in our lives, the saber-toothed tiger never leaves the cave. And what this means is that you are constantly shunting blood away from the gut. And the result of that is that the gut cells cannot reproduce properly because they're not getting all of the nutrition that they need to be able to work properly. Makes sense, right? So this is why stress is such an important cause and factor with leaky gut. All right. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys and girls. So how is leaky gut fixed? Well, most of us in the holistic world refer to the 4 R's as our way of fixing or reversing leaky gut. And the 4 R's are right here. They are remove, replace, re-inoculate, and repair. And so I'm going to go through each one of these 4 R's individually so we can understand what exactly they mean. So number 1 is remove. Well, what are we removing? What we're removing is the offending foods and substances that are causing the damage in the first place. So the first thing that we think about removing from the diet are the things that we know are likely going to be factors here. So number 1, grains. That's the first thing that I get my patients off of if we're dealing with leaky gut. And I'm not talking about all grain. Just some grains. I'm not just talking about the gluten-containing grains. I'm talking about all grains completely. I'm usually a take one step at a time kind of guy, but with this issue, you got to jump in the deep end. You got to get off of grains completely, and you have to be neurotic about it. Because many people who have sensitivities, one small exposure every so often will keep them in their loop and not allow healing to happen. And that's why you got to be neurotic about it. I'll give you a quick example. I've got a patient that I worked with years ago who had migraine headaches. She literally, my heart bled for her because she came into me in tears saying that she did not know a day without pain for the last 20 years. I could not imagine that myself. And I'm convinced that part of her issue had to do with the gluten sensitivity and we needed to eliminate that from her diet. So we got her off of gluten completely. And she came back, 2 months later after having had that experience for 8 weeks. And I said with excitement, "How are your headaches?" And she said, "Slightly better, but still there." And I was disappointed, like she was. And we went through her diet and we found out that she was great about eliminating that absolutely completely, except for one thing. Every Sunday in church, she was getting a wafer that had gluten in it. And so we found her some gluten free wafers to take to church with her, and her headaches went away completely. It's just an illustration of how you have to jump into the deep end when it comes to the elimination thing. Now, generally speaking, with an elimination diet, that's something that we're going to do for 8 weeks. And you have to be completely neurotic about it. What else are we eliminating? Well, we have to eliminate the toxins that are in the body as well. And so, eliminating the diet and the influx of toxins is one part of the equation, but we also want to increase the body's ability and support the body's ability to get rid of toxins. And so here we're talking about supporting all of the organs that are responsible for or play a role in elimination. So we're talking about chiefly the liver and supporting liver function, but there's also the kidneys and lymph and skin and lungs and the bowels. All of that's very important in helping to remove. We also want to make sure that we're removing harmful organisms, because if the gut is out of balance and you've got a bunch of things growing in your gut that really don't belong there, like negative bacteria, viruses, yeast, funguses. So sometimes the remove part also involves using supplements that can kill off the things that shouldn't be growing there. So that's the first R, remove. The second R is replace. And what are we trying to replace? Well, I had told you about the digestive story and how many of us on the standard American diet do not digest things completely. And so what we do is we replenish back into the food the enzymes that are taken out by the things that we do to the foods, the standard American diet, by cooking and processing our foods. And so taking a plant-based digestive enzyme when you eat is one way to replace that for that's been taken out of the food. Now, notice I said plant-based digestive enzyme. Now, the reason I emphasize that is because you can get pancreatic enzymes to take as an enzyme supplement as well. The problem with that is that in your stomach are little detectors that give feedback to the pancreas when the digestive enzymes, when the pancreatic enzymes are there. So in a perfect world, you eat something. As soon as you start smelling and tasting that food, it starts the digestive process. One of the things that happens is a signal gets sent to the pancreas that, hey, some food's coming down here and we're going to want to digest it. So give us a hand. And the pancreas then creates pancreatic enzymes and dumps them into the stomach. Well, when that happens, there's little detectors in the stomach that say, okay, we got them. Here they are. Thanks. And it tells the the pancreas, okay, you can stop production now. That's called negative feedback or down regulation. Well, when you put pancreatic enzymes in from the outside world, you're constantly down regulating the pancreas doing its job. So when you use plant-based digestive enzymes, that doesn't happen. And towards the end, I'll tell you some specific products that I use that I get excellent results with. Hydrochloric acid is another form of a digestive enzyme, really. And many people, as they age, do not make digestive hydrochloric acid in their stomach as well as they used to. And that's why they have a problem in digesting foods, especially proteins. And that's why they have a problem with food sensitivities, especially the proteins that are in foods. Reflux is actually usually caused by a lack of stomach acid, not too much stomach acid. So if you happen to be taking any one of those prescription or over-the-counter medicines that interfere with your stomach's acid, like as simple as Tums or, one of the prescription medicines like Prilosec or Prevacid, you are actually interfering with the normal functioning of your body in a dread way that leads to other problems that people aren't equating to that. And then, of course, we also want to replace certain nutrients like healthy fats and vitamins and minerals. And so very important to be on a quality multivitamin as well as your, a reasonable diet. Now, understand that if you have a kink in the system of digestion, even if you eat a great diet, you're not going to get all the benefit from that food. And that's why supplements can be a little bit more helpful because they're sort of already extracted forms of those vitamins and minerals or healthy fats that your body can absorb more easily. Okay, the third R is called reinoculate. And of course, we're talking about probiotics, the good bacteria. So there are many, many factors that beat up the good bacteria and many signs and symptoms that there's an imbalance of the good bacteria. Obviously, again, those gut issues like constipation or diarrhea, but immune dysfunction really, really related to the bacteria in your gut. Hormonal balance, very, very connected to the bacteria in your gut. Heart disease. You know that the good bacteria in your gut converts vitamin K that you get from vegetable sources into the vitamin K that activates a protein that tells calcium not to go into your blood vessels. So when you have an imbalance of the good bacteria, you're actually more susceptible to getting, blockages of your arteries in your heart. It's that simple. There's a whole world of bacteria out there. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. There's a whole world of products out there. And again, I'll talk about a specific product and why I recommend it in a second. There's also something known as prebiotics. And these are the nutrients that are needed that help create the environment that the probiotics, the good bacteria, can actually live in and thrive and proliferate. And so sometimes you're taking a probiotic and you're not getting the benefit that we expect. It's because it oftentimes is because the environment isn't proper for those probiotics to grow the way we want them to. And so sometimes we use supplements that are called prebiotics as well. The fourth R is then repair. And so what are we trying to repair? We're trying to reverse the ravages of inflammation within the gut. And we're also working on gut cell reproduction. This is really important to understand. And this is the way I like to understand or explain this topic. And it's easy to understand this when you think of it. Gut cells reproduce very, very quickly. In a matter of days, they turn over, all of your gut cells. And here's how you actually knew that fact, although you didn't think of it this way. If you have somebody that you know that has cancer and they take chemotherapy for that cancer, the way the chemotherapy works is that it targets fast-growing cells. After all, that's what cancers really are. They're just cells that keep reproducing very, very quickly. And if that goes unchecked, then they conglomerate into what we call a tumor, and then they start taking over the whole body. And so, in a nutshell, chemotherapy actually just targets fast-growing cells. It's a poison to fast-growing cells, and that's why it can be effective at killing the cancer. Well, what else happens when someone takes chemotherapy? Their hair falls out. Why is that? Because hair cells are fast-growing cells. You know that because of how often you have to go to the barbershop or the beauty salon to get your hair done, right? Your immune system gets beat up. Immune cells are fast reproducing cells, and you get gut problems, and that's because the gut cells are fast reproducing cells. They actually turn over in a matter of days, all of your cells. So there is a nutrient that's called L-glutamine. It's a simple amino acid. It's in every one of the animal proteins. It's one of the amino acids that's part of animal proteins. And it's fuel for gut cells to reproduce properly. And so that's one of the tools that we use to bring about this repair part of it, of the R. So there are a few other considerations, as I had mentioned before, how important stress is to this. And so adrenal support plays a very, very important role with reversing leaky gut. And then also sleep support, because if you're not sleeping properly, one, is tremendously stressful to the body, and two, nothing in your body can work properly. Plain and simple. And those of you who have had sleep issues, maybe because of hormonal things that you've aged or whatever, you know how that affects everything in how your body works during the day. So sometimes we will use different herbs or nutrients or supplements to help support both the adrenals and the ability to sleep properly. So let's talk about a plan of action here. So number one, as we spoke, and hopefully you've gotten that message already, you understand it, is about changing the diet. And oftentimes it entails an elimination diet. And again, far and away, the number one offender are grains. We also want to take a look at how clean the diet is when it comes to additives and colorings and flavorings and preservatives. Those things are not foods. Those chemicals were never intended to get absorbed across that membrane that we call the gut. But because of leaky gut, they do. And when that happens, it wreaks havoc in the body. It causes the immune system to be on not just alert, but hyper alert, and then sometimes won't turn off. That's autoimmune sort of disease. It causes inflammation. It overwhelms the liver, stops the liver from being able to do its job properly, and can then affect any tissue and that tissue's function in the body. And so literally, those things can be the cause of every one of the chronic diseases that we're trying to avoid. So when I say change the diet, it's not just eliminating, foods that we might be sensitive to, but it's also eliminating colorings and flavorings and preservatives and all of that stuff. And so if you are eating something out of a package, well, first of all, stop. Make foods yourself. Don't eat them out of packages anymore. But if you have to, because, I'm a realist and we live in this modern society where sometimes it's a necessity, look at the ingredients. If there's any numbers, if there's any colors, if there's any names or words that you can't pronounce, they're not food and they do not belong in your system. And you should eliminate them completely. And then number two, there's a whole host of supplements that can be used to help reverse this. And so I'm going to go through them real quickly. I know that we don't have a ton of time left, but I'm going to go through them so that you understand what I'm talking about. And again, I will invite anybody that's listening to this webinar, whether you're listening to it live right now or whether you're listening to a recording of it, to feel free to get in touch with me at my office. It's brian@wellbeinggps.com, or you can find our phone numbers all over the website, Wellbeing GPS. And allow me to help you apply this information to you as an individual and help you find the best path to reverse this problem. So number one, digestive enzymes. And again, I'll emphasize plant-based digestive enzymes. It's two different formulas that I use, that I've used for years. There's one by a company called Orthomolecular, which is called Digeszyme V. And then there's another one by Integrative Therapeutics, which is called Similase. I use Digeszyme V more often just because it's one capsule that you have to take instead of two with each meal. Now, both of these enzymes are complete enzymes. And I emphasize that because there are a lot of products on the market that try to be complete but really aren't. Proteases, that's the enzyme that breaks down proteins, are active in different pH ranges. And so from your stomach and then throughout the trip through your gut, your small intestine and then large intestine, the pH changes. And so in your stomach, things are very acidic, and then they get less acidic and less acidic. And you need proteases that are active in different pH ranges to be able to completely digest your food. And both of those brands that I just mentioned, Digeszyme V by Orthomolecular and Similase by Integrative Therapeutics, have a variety of proteases that are active at all the different pH ranges. The other thing that I look for in an enzyme product, protease will break proteins down into smaller chains of amino acids called polypeptides. There's another enzyme called peptidase that completes the job and makes them into individual amino acids. And both of those formulas have peptidase. They also have the enzymes that you need to break down starches and fats and sugars and carbs and everything. The enzymes that are in BNO and they have lactase to help with lactose. They have, they're complete enzymes. Number two are probiotics, good bacteria, very, very important. And the product that I use more than anything else is actually called Probiotic by a company called Healthy Origins. The reason I like this particular product is, number one, it's completely shelf stable, which means that you do not have to refrigerate it. That is a big thing, and I have found that not having to refrigerate your probiotic really increases compliance, because when that bottle's in the refrigerator, it's out of your sight, and many times that dosage gets missed. Number two, it's very, very potent, 30 billion bacteria per capsule. And that is guaranteed until time of expiration of that bottle. That is a huge distinction. Many products out there tell you that they have X amount of bacteria, so many billions of bacteria, but what they mean is at time of manufacture. And by time it makes it from the manufacturer to the wholesaler to the retailer to you, oftentimes there's nothing live in those capsules anymore, or not as much as you would have hoped. This is guaranteed until time of expiration. Number three, it is a multi-strain formula. There's 8 different bacteria that are in that formula, all very important for one function or another within the gut, not just acidophilus and bifidus, but a whole bunch of other ones with long names. And number four, maybe most importantly, it's the most affordable one. I mean, we actually sell a bottle of 60 of them for around $20. And so it's just the best product out there. The third thing on the list is anti-inflammation. And the fourth thing is fuel for gut cells. As I told you before, the fuel for gut cells is a very specific amino acid that's called L-glutamine. And so there is a medical food that's made by a company called, again, Orthomolecular, that's called Inflammacore. And it is a medical food that's designed to reverse gut inflammation and to get gut cells to reproduce properly. And so it has a big dose of glutamine. It's a great source of protein. It has about 20 grams of protein per serving. It's a protein that is completely non-allergenic, completely non-animal, non-dairy, non-soy. And then it has other components to it, nutritional and herbal, that are anti-inflammatory to help reverse all of this. And so I usually have, it depends on what somebody wants to do. If weight is also an issue, then oftentimes somebody will use this as a meal replacement. And if weight isn't an issue, then you'll use it as a meal supplement or use it in between meals. And then the last thing on the list here is adrenal support. Again, very, very important. There's a great product by a company called Pure Encapsulations that's called Cortisol Calm. And it has a group of herbs and nutrients to calm the body's response to that cortisol burn, that stress that we all live with. And so I have people take one in the morning and one in the evening or at bedtime, and it does a great job of calming the cortisol spikes or the cortisol release, which then allows blood flow to go back to the cells of the gut, which allows those gut cells to reproduce better, which then works to reverse the leaky gut. Wow. I think I'm to the end of the presentation. I hope that that's been helpful for you. If you do have some questions, now's a good time to type that into the box. And while you're doing that, I'll just remind everybody again that on our website, I've been doing these webinars for 3 years now and have probably 35 or 40 of them recorded, all sorts of different topics, including what you see there, stress and weight loss and getting a good night's sleep, cholesterol issues, and many other topics that you don't see listed there, like osteoporosis or depression, or sometimes I'll look at a particular nutrient like vitamin K or vitamin D or iodine. Sometimes I look at broader issues like being on a grain-free diet, or ways that the food industry has tricked us into thinking we're eating something healthy that we haven't, things like that. And so I would encourage you to go to the website, wellbeinggps.com, and check out the archives and share this information with other people. It's so important. And again, I'll go back to what I said at the very beginning. The number one killer in this country is misinformation. And my work is really to help people better understand the ramifications of their decisions. Because when you do that, then you can change those decisions. One of those may be that when you wake up in the morning, you have a 12-grain whole wheat bagel, thinking that that's good for you because it's whole grains. And I'm telling you that that's maybe the worst thing that you can have for breakfast. For most of us, in the way our body works, that's like having a Snickers bar. And if that's the case, I say have a Snickers bar, because that's a lot more fun than that bagel. Anyways, everybody, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I honor your willingness to spend some of your important time with me, and I hope you found it useful. And hope to see you again on a future webinar. Have a great evening.